Outrun me with that junk car, and I'll sign my company over to you," Ethan Caldwell said, his voice smooth, amused, and just loud enough to carry across the private track as a ripple of laughter followed, sharp and effortless like it belonged here among polished steel and tailored suits. And the sound seemed to hang in the warm California air as if the asphalt itself was listening. The late afternoon sun burned low over the horizon, casting long gold reflections across a lineup of exotic cars. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, machines that gleamed like trophies. Each one worth more than most homes, each one a statement. And then there was the other car, parked a few yards away, paint faded, body scratched, a tired engine ticking softly under a dented hood like it had stories no one here cared to hear. Marcus Reed stood beside it, one hand resting lightly on the roof, his fingers marked with oil stains that never quite washed out, his posture calm, almost detached, as if the laughter around him moved through him without leaving a mark. And when he looked up, his eyes didn't rise to meet the crowd, only the track ahead, stretching half a mile of clean, perfect blacktop under open sky. Ethan stepped closer, expensive shoes tapping lightly against the pavement, the confidence in his stride practiced and precise, a man used to rooms turning toward him, to conversations bending around his presence. And he flicked his car keys once in the air before catching them, a small motion that drew attention like a spark. "You heard me," he added, tilting his head slightly, studying Marcus not as an opponent but as a curiosity, something out of place. "That thing won't even make it past 60. And someone behind him chuckled. Another voice murmured something about scrap metal, and the circle tightened just enough to make the contrast clearer. Wealth against wear, polish against dust. Marcus didn't answer right away, his gaze still fixed down the track, where heat shimmered faintly above the asphalt, bending the light into something fluid. And for a moment, there was a shift so subtle it almost went unnoticed, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to hesitation but to memory, like a sound only he could hear, distant and buried beneath years of silence. The wind moved lightly across the open space, carrying the faint scent of rubber and gasoline, brushing against his jacket as he exhaled slowly, steady, controlled. And when he finally looked back, his expression hadn't changed, no anger, no urgency, just a quiet presence that didn't ask for attention and didn't need it. Ethan watched him for a second longer than expected, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes, before it vanished beneath a familiar smile. And he gestured toward the track with a casual sweep of his hand, as if inviting a performance already decided. Engines hummed softly in the background, a low mechanical chorus waiting to rise. But for now, everything held in place. The crowd, the cars, the tension coiled between two men standing at opposite ends of more than just a race. And somewhere in that stillness, unnoticed by most, the moment balanced on the edge of something about to shift. The laughter did not fade right away. It lingered in uneven waves, bouncing off polished metal and glass like something rehearsed, something expected, and Marcus Reed stood in the middle of it without reacting, his hand still resting on the roof of the car, as if grounding himself to something steady while the world around him tried to tilt the moment in another direction. A man in a navy blazer stepped closer to Ethan Caldwell and whispered something that drew another round of smirks, and a few phones lifted quietly, recording, waiting, because moments like this had a way of turning into stories people like to share later, stories about confidence, about power, about someone being put back in their place. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the gravel beneath his boots crunching just enough to break through the noise, and his eyes moved once more along the length of the track, measuring distance not in numbers but in instinct. The curve near the far end where the asphalt dipped, slightly before rising again, the faint line where tire marks overlapped from previous runs, the way the wind brushed from left to right across the open stretch, subtle but present. Behind him, the old car gave a soft metallic tick as it cooled, the sound small, almost fragile compared to the deep, confident purr of the supercars nearby. And yet there was something deliberate in the way Marcus reached for the driver's side door, not rushed, not hesitant, just precise, like each motion had already been decided long before he arrived here. Ethan watched him with a half smile, arms loosely crossed now, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested the outcome had already been written in his favor. And when Marcus opened the door. The hinges let out a quiet creak that drew a few more chuckles from the crowd. Someone muttering that the race might end before it even began. Marcus slid into the seat, the interior worn but clean, the steering wheel smooth in places where years of grip had polished it down, and for a brief second, his fingers tightened around it, not from nerves but from recognition, like touching something familiar after a long time away. The cabin smelled faintly of oil and sun, warmed fabric, and as he adjusted the mirror, his reflection stared back at him, steady, unreadable, the noise outside muffled now, distant, like it belonged to another space entirely. He turned the key, and the engine responded with a low, uneven rumble before settling into a steady idle, not loud, not impressive, but consistent, and Marcus listened to it carefully, his head tilting just slightly, catching every vibration, every subtle shift in rhythm, as if the machine was speaking in a language only he understood. Across the track, Ethan stepped into his own car, the door closing with a solid, expensive thud, and when his engine came to life, it roared with authority, a deep, controlled power that rolled across the pavement and pressed into the air, drawing a collective reaction from the crowd as heads turned and shoulders straightened, as if the sound itself confirmed everything they already believed. A staff member in a black polo jogged to the center line, raising one hand to signal readiness, his eyes moving between the two cars, one gleaming under the sun, the other absorbing it without reflection, and for a moment, everything narrowed down to that space between them, the distance, the expectation, the imbalance that seemed impossible to ignore. Inside his car, Marcus exhaled slowly, his foot resting lightly on the pedal, not pressing yet, just feeling the response, the connection, and outside, the wind shifted again, brushing across the track in a quiet sweep, carrying with it the faint echo of something older than the moment, something that did not belong to the laughter or the cameras or the man waiting across from him, something that lived in muscle memory and silence, waiting patiently beneath the surface. The raised hand in the center hesitated for just a fraction of a second longer than expected, as if sensing that what was about to begin carried more weight than a simple race. And then the stillness tightened. The engines held their breath, and the space between two very different worlds prepared to close in a single, irreversible line forward. The raised hand dropped, not sharply, but with a quiet finality. And in that instant the world split into motion and sound as Ethan Caldwell's car surged forward with immediate force, the engine roaring like it had been waiting for this exact moment, tires gripping the pavement with precision as the polished machine leapt ahead, slicing through the warm air with effortless acceleration while the crowd reacted almost on cue, voices rising, heads turning, confidence reaffirmed in the span of a single heartbeat. Marcus Reed's car moved a fraction of a second later, not slow, not hesitant, but measured, the engine responding with a deeper, steadier tone that did not try to compete with volume, only with control, and as the distance between them stretched in the first 100 yards, it looked exactly the way everyone expected, the expensive car pulling ahead cleanly, widening the gap with each passing second while the older vehicle followed behind, its worn frame vibrating slightly. Under the strain of speed, inside the cabin, Marcus did not rush, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, not where Ethan was, not where the crowd stood, but where the track began to shift, the subtle dip ahead, the line where asphalt changed texture just enough to matter, and his foot adjusted with precision, easing into the acceleration as if aligning himself with something deeper than the moment, something that required patience before it revealed itself. The wind pressed harder now against the side of the car, the hum of the engine rising in pitch, and for a brief second, the sound transformed in his ears, no longer uneven, no longer worn, but familiar, layered with something older, something that echoed through memory like a distant engine screaming down a straightaway under stadium lights. The gap ahead widened, Ethan's car already pushing past the quarter-mile mark, its tail lights sharp against the glowing horizon, and a few voices near the starting line began to settle into satisfied laughter. The outcome seemingly confirmed before the race had truly unfolded, phones lowering slightly as the expected story wrote itself in real time. Marcus inhaled slowly, the air filling his lungs with a calm that did not belong to pressure, and his grip on the wheel shifted, subtle, but deliberate, his left hand guiding while his right adjusted with a precision that did not come from instinct alone, but from repetition, from thousands of miles driven at speeds where hesitation did not exist. And as the car approached the first subtle curve, something changed, not in the machine, but in the way it moved under him, responding more cleanly, more sharply, as if it had been waiting for this exact input. The tires held the line tighter now, the steering smoother, the transition through the curve almost seamless, and the distance between the two cars stopped growing, not yet closing, but no longer expanding, a detail so small it went unnoticed by most, lost in the noise of assumption and expectation. Ahead, Ethan remained focused, confident, his eyes flicking briefly to the rearview mirror before returning to the track, the faint outline of the other car still distant, still exactly where it should be. And he pressed further, pushing his machine into higher speed, trusting in its engineering, its superiority, the certainty that had carried him into this moment without doubt. Behind him, Marcus leaned slightly into the motion of the car, not forcing it, not chasing aggressively, but guiding it, feeling every shift in weight, every response in the chassis, the road speaking through the steering column into his hands. And for a brief second, the noise outside faded again, replaced by something sharper, clearer, the kind of focus that narrowed the world into nothing but speed, distance, and timing. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the track, and as the cars moved deeper into the run, the air itself seemed to tighten, holding on to the moment as if aware that something beneath the surface had begun to move, something quiet, controlled, and not yet understood by the people watching from a distance, still convinced they already knew how this would end. The midpoint of the track approached faster than it appeared, the horizon compressing as both cars cut through the heated air, and Ethan Caldwell felt it before he consciously registered it. A subtle tension in the moment that did not match the easy dominance he had expected, his grip on the steering wheel tightening just slightly as his eyes flicked again to the rearview mirror. And this time, something was different, not dramatic, not yet alarming, but enough to interrupt the rhythm of certainty he had been riding since the start. The old car was still behind him, but no longer fading into distance, no longer shrinking into insignificance. Instead, it held its place, steady, controlled, as if it had found a pace that refused to be dismissed. And for a brief second, Ethan's expression shifted, the faintest crease forming between his brows before he pushed the thought aside and pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine responding with a deeper surge of power, the speed climbing cleanly as the machine beneath him did exactly what it was built to do. Behind him, Marcus Reed leaned into the movement of the car with a quiet precision that did not chase speed recklessly but shaped it, guiding the weight through each subtle shift in the road, his hands adjusting in small, almost invisible increments, his breathing steady, measured, his focus narrowing further until the world outside the windshield became a series of calculated points, distance, angle, timing. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. The engine beneath him hummed with a consistency that masked its age, responding not with brute force but with cooperation, as if the car itself trusted the hands guiding it. And Marcus listened to it, not with his ears alone, but through the vibration in the wheel, the pressure beneath his foot, the slight pull as the road curved gently ahead, the dip in the track approached, the same one he had noticed earlier. And as the front of the car reached it, he adjusted, easing the throttle at precisely the right moment before pressing again, allowing the car to settle into the shift instead of fighting it. And the result was subtle but real, a smoother transition, less resistance, a fraction of momentum preserved that most would not notice but that Marcus felt immediately. The distance ahead tightened, not dramatically, but enough to exist, enough to begin rewriting the invisible line between them. And at the starting line, a few members of the crowd leaned forward without realizing it, their earlier confidence replaced by a curiosity they could not yet explain, phones lifting again, not out of certainty now but out of instinct, sensing that something had changed. Ethan saw it again in the mirror, clearer this time, the shape of the car behind him holding its position with a quiet persistence that did not belong to something struggling to keep up, and his jaw set slightly as he recalibrated, his mind shifting from casual dominance to controlled competition, his foot pressing further, extracting more from the machine beneath him as the speed pushed higher, the track narrowing in his vision as the end approached. Marcus did not react to the increase, did not mirror it immediately. Instead, he held his pace for a fraction longer, letting the moment stretch, letting the rhythm settle, and then, almost imperceptibly, he adjusted, the engine responding with a deeper note, the car gaining speed not in a sudden burst, but in a smooth, continuous rise that aligned perfectly with the road ahead. The wind roared louder now, pressing against both vehicles, carrying the sound of engines across the open space, blending them into a single, sustained note that filled the air. And as the final stretch began to form in the distance, the space between expectation and reality continued to narrow, not yet broken, but no longer secure, as if the outcome itself had begun to hesitate, waiting to see which version of the story would hold. The final stretch began to pull into focus, the far end of the track no longer a distant blur, but a fixed point drawing both cars forward, and the air between them tightened with a pressure that could be felt even from the sidelines, where the crowd had grown quieter without realizing it, their earlier laughter fading into something more uncertain, more attentive. Ethan Caldwell leaned forward slightly in his seat, his posture no longer relaxed, his hands firm on the wheel as he pushed the car harder, the engine responding with a powerful surge that pressed him back against the seat, the speed climbing past what most drivers would comfortably hold. And for a moment, it felt right again, the dominance returning, the narrative restoring itself. But then he saw it again in the mirror, clearer now, undeniable. The outline of the old car no longer distant but present, closer than it should have been, its movement smooth, controlled, almost effortless in a way that did not match its appearance, and something in Ethan's chest tightened, not fear, not yet, but a sharp awareness that forced him to focus differently. Behind him, Marcus Reed remained composed, his breathing steady, his eyes locked on the narrowing distance ahead, and as the final quarter mile unfolded, he adjusted again, not aggressively, not with desperation, but with precision, his foot pressing down with exact timing, the engine responding with a deeper, more unified tone, as if every part of the car had aligned with his intent. The wind roared louder now, rushing past the windows in a constant stream, and the road seemed to rise slightly before leveling out, a subtle change that Marcus anticipated before it came, his hands guiding the wheel with a confidence that did not need correction, his body moving with the car instead of against it. The gap closed further, inch by inch, the distance that once felt unbreakable now reduced to something fragile, something temporary, and at the edge of his vision, Ethan caught the movement, the shift, the presence that should not have been there, and his jaw tightened as he pressed even harder, pushing the machine to its limits, trusting in its power, its design, its certainty. The engine roared in response, louder, more aggressive, but beneath that sound, there was a slight strain, a resistance that came with being pushed beyond comfort, and Ethan felt it, even as he refused to acknowledge it, his focus narrowing into determination, into the need to reassert control over a moment that was slipping in ways he did not fully understand. Marcus did not chase that intensity, did not mirror the strain. Instead, he remained within a space of control, his movements clean, his timing exact, and as the final curve approached, the most critical part of the track, he prepared, not with urgency, but with certainty, his hands adjusting the wheel with a subtle shift that positioned the car perfectly for what came next. The tires held the line with precision, the car gliding through the curve with a smoothness that contrasted sharply with the aggressive push happening ahead. And in that single moment, the difference became visible, not to everyone, but to those watching closely, the way one car fought the road while the other seemed to move with it. The exit of the curve opened into the last straightaway, the finish line now fully visible, and the gap between them had narrowed to something measurable, something real, no longer theoretical. And as both cars surged forward into the final seconds, the certainty that had defined the beginning of the race began to fracture, replaced by a tension that held every eye on the track, waiting, watching, as the outcome balanced on a line that was no longer predictable. The final straight stretched ahead like a line drawn between two different realities, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to slow, not in time, but in perception, as if the world itself had leaned in to watch what would happen next. Ethan Caldwell felt it in the tension of his hands, the slight tremor in the steering wheel as the speed climbed higher, the engine roaring with power yet carrying a subtle edge of strain beneath its confidence. And when he glanced into the mirror again, the sight no longer felt like a passing concern, but something undeniable, something that did not belong to the story he had written in his mind before this race began. The old car was there, not just present but closing, its movement smooth and unwavering. As if the distance between them had become a problem already solved, Marcus Reed did not rush into that moment, did not react to the proximity with urgency. Instead, he remained still in the way only someone deeply in control could be, his breathing steady, his eyes fixed on the line ahead. And within the quiet of the cabin, the outside noise faded again, leaving only the hum of the engine and the rhythm of his heartbeat aligning into something precise, something practiced. His fingers adjusted slightly on the wheel, not tightening, not loosening, just shifting into a position that felt inevitable, as if every motion from the start had led exactly here. And as the final seconds unfolded, he pressed forward with a controlled increase, the car responding not with a sudden burst, but with a seamless rise in speed, every part working together with a clarity that erased its age, its wear, its limitations. The wind roared against the frame, the track blurred beneath the tires, and the distance that once defined the race now dissolved into something fragile, something temporary. And, for the first time, Ethan felt it fully, the loss of certainty, the realization that control was no longer entirely his, and his focus sharpened with intensity, his foot pressing harder, demanding more, pushing the machine to hold the lead that had once felt effortless. But beneath that demand, there was resistance, subtle but real, the kind that grows when something is forced beyond its natural balance. And Ethan's grip tightened as he tried to correct, to maintain, to reclaim the narrative that had begun to slip. Marcus, behind him, did not fight the moment, did not force anything beyond its place. Instead, he moved with it, guiding the car forward with precision that felt almost quiet against the intensity around him. And as the two vehicles surged side by side for the first time, the difference became unmistakable, not just in speed, but in presence, in control, in the way one driver reacted while the other simply knew. The finish line stood ahead, no longer distant, no longer abstract, and the space between them narrowed into something that could be measured in inches and fractions. In a single decision made at the exact right time, and in that suspended instant, where everything balanced between expectation and truth, Marcus held steady, not chasing the moment, not rushing it, but allowing it to come to him, as if he had been here before, many times, in places far louder, far brighter, where the outcome depended on the same quiet certainty he carried now. The engines roared, the air trembled, and as both cars crossed into the final stretch of that line, the silence from the crowd deepened into something complete, as if even the noise had stepped back, waiting for the result that was no longer guaranteed, no longer predictable, but entirely real. The finish line came into full view. A thin white stripe stretched across the asphalt like a quiet boundary between what was believed and what was real, and in the final seconds before crossing it, something shifted in a way that could not be ignored, not by the crowd, not by Ethan Caldwell, and not even by the air itself, which seemed to hold its breath as the two cars ran nearly side by side. Ethan felt it first as a flicker of disbelief, his eyes cutting sharply toward the movement beside him, the old car no longer behind, no longer distant, but aligned with him in a way that did not make sense. And for a fraction of a second, his mind searched for explanation, for error, for anything that could restore the order he had trusted. But there was none, only the steady presence of something he had underestimated. Marcus Reed did not look over, did not acknowledge the proximity. His gaze fixed forward with a calm that did not change, and as the final yards closed in, his hands moved. With a precision that felt almost invisible, a slight adjustment, a controlled push, the car responding instantly as if it had been waiting for that exact command. The engine beneath him did not roar louder, it did not strain, it aligned, its sound smoothing into a single continuous note that carried through the final stretch with clarity. And in that moment, the difference revealed itself completely. not in power, but in mastery. Ethan pressed harder, the engine responding with force, but the control he relied on began to thin at the edges. The car pushing forward with intensity, yet lacking the seamless flow that Marcus held, and the line between them, once defined by distance, now existed only as a fragile margin that shifted with every inch. From the sidelines, the crowd had gone completely still, phones raised but forgotten, eyes locked on the two vehicles as they moved in perfect parallel, the outcome suspended in a space too close to call, too real to predict. The sunlight reflected sharply off the surface of Ethan's car, bright and commanding, while Marcus's vehicle absorbed the light, darker, quieter, almost unnoticed except for the way it moved, the way it held its line without deviation, without excess. The final seconds compressed into something weightless, and in that narrowing space, Marcus made one last adjustment, subtle, exact, his foot pressing with a precision that did not seek more, only what was needed, and the response came instantly. The car gliding forward with a smooth acceleration that edged just beyond the balance point. Ethan saw it, felt it, the shift that could not be reversed, his focus sharpening into something urgent as he pushed again. But the moment had already turned, already chosen its direction. The front of Marcus's car crossed the line first, not dramatically, not with spectacle, but with a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. And in the instant that followed, the sound of both engines carried past the finish before fading into the open space beyond, leaving behind a silence that settled over the track like something earned. Marcus eased off the accelerator, his breathing steady, his hands relaxing slightly on the wheel as the car slowed, the moment passing through him without celebration, without reaction, while behind him, Ethan's car followed through the line. The engine still loud, but no longer commanding, its presence reduced to something that had just been proven incomplete. On the sidelines, no one spoke, no one moved, the weight of what they had just witnessed settling in slowly, piece by piece, as the story they expected dissolved into something else entirely, something quieter, something undeniable, and in that stillness, the truth stood clear, not announced, not explained, but revealed in full. The engines faded into a low hum as both cars slowed beyond the finish, the sound stretching out across the open track before dissolving into the quiet that followed. And for a few seconds, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire space needed time to catch up with what had just happened. Marcus Reed guided the car to a gradual stop off to the side, his hands easing from the wheel with the same calm precision that had carried him through the race, his breathing steady, his posture unchanged, while the old engine ticked softly as it settled, the heat rising faintly from the hood into the cooling air. Across from him, Ethan Caldwell brought his car to a halt more abruptly, the motion sharp compared to the smooth control that had defined his driving before, and when the engine cut, the silence inside his vehicle felt heavier than expected, pressing inward as his hands remained fixed on the wheel for a moment longer than necessary. His gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again, toward the track ahead, as if replaying the last seconds in his mind, searching for the point where certainty had shifted into something else. Outside, the crowd began to stir, but the movement was hesitant, unsure, the earlier confidence replaced by a quiet disbelief that spread through small glances and lowered voices. Phones still raised but no longer capturing a predictable outcome, only the aftermath of something unexpected. Marcus opened the door and stepped out, his boots touching the pavement with a soft, grounded sound, and he stood there for a moment, looking down the length of the track, not at the crowd, not at Ethan, but at the line he had just crossed. The moment already behind him, a light breeze moved across the space, brushing against his jacket, carrying with it the fading scent of fuel and heated asphalt, and he exhaled slowly, the tension of the race leaving him without urgency, without display. Ethan stepped out of his car a second later, his movements slower now, less defined, and as he closed the door, the sharp sound echoed briefly before fading into the stillness. He looked toward Marcus, his expression no longer carrying the easy confidence from before, something more complex, taking its place, something unsettled, as if the result had not only surprised him but forced him to reconsider something deeper than the race itself. A few people from the sidelines began to approach, cautiously at first, their steps measured, their voices low, as if unsure how to respond to a moment that did not fit the story they had expected to witness. One of them glanced down at a phone, scrolling quickly, then paused, his brow tightening slightly before he looked back toward Marcus with a different kind of attention, and within seconds, that reaction began to ripple outward, quiet but noticeable. As more screens lit up, more searches made, more pieces of information surfacing into awareness. Ethan noticed the shift, the subtle change in the way people were looking, not just at the cars, but at the man who had driven the one no one had taken seriously, and he took a step forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to connect something just beyond reach. Marcus remained where he was, calm, still, the noise around him building slowly again but not touching him, his presence unchanged, his focus no longer on the race, as if the outcome had already been accepted long before it happened. The track, once filled with sound and expectation, now held something quieter, something heavier, a realization forming not through words, but through the undeniable contrast between what had been assumed and what had just been proven, and in that growing awareness, the space between Marcus and Ethan carried a weight that no longer needed explanation, only recognition. The quiet did not break all at once, it unfolded slowly, like a realization settling into place, and Marcus Reed stood there beside the car as if none of it required acknowledgement, his gaze drifting once more across the track where the last traces of motion had already faded into stillness, the white finish line now just a mark on the asphalt, no longer charged with expectation. Behind him, the faint ticking of the engine softened, the heat dissipating into the cooling air, and the wind moved lightly through the open space, carrying away the last echoes of what had just happened. Ethan Caldwell took another step forward, stopping a few feet away, close enough now to see Marcus clearly without the distortion of distance or assumption. And for a moment, he did not speak, his expression caught between disbelief and something quieter, something that did not come easily to him. Around them, the small crowd had formed a loose circle, not pressing in, not intruding, but present, watching, waiting, their earlier confidence replaced by a silence that felt almost respectful, as if they understood, even without words, that this moment did not belong to noise. One of the men near the back lowered his phone slowly, his eyes still fixed on Marcus, and another glanced again at his screen, then back up, connecting the name that had begun to circulate quietly through the group, a name that carried weight in a different world, a world of speed and precision that few of them had truly understood. Ethan finally exhaled, the sound subtle but noticeable in the stillness, and he looked down briefly before lifting his gaze again, this time without the edge of challenge, without the confidence that had framed his words earlier. And when he spoke, his voice was lower, steadier, carrying a weight that had not been there before. "You could have said something." And the sentence lingered between them, not as an accusation, but as an attempt to understand what had just unfolded. Marcus did not respond immediately, his posture unchanged, his presence calm, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, even, carrying no trace of triumph. "You did not ask," and the simplicity of it settled into the space more deeply than anything louder could have. Ethan absorbed the words without reply, his gaze shifting slightly as if reconsidering more than just the race. And for a moment, he nodded, not fully, not dramatically, but enough to acknowledge what could not be undone, the assumptions, the certainty, the way he had measured someone without ever truly seeing them. The wind moved again, brushing past both men, lifting the edge of Marcus's jacket slightly before falling still, and somewhere in the distance, a car door closed softly, the sound echoing faintly before disappearing. Marcus turned back toward his car, his movement unhurried, deliberate, as if the outcome had already been filed away into something finished, something that did not need to be revisited. And as he reached the door, he paused for just a moment, his hand resting on the handle, before opening it and stepping inside. The engine came to life with a quiet, steady rumble, unchanged, unremarkable to anyone who did not know how to listen. And Marcus guided the car forward, rolling slowly away from the track, not accelerating, not looking back, the distance between him and the moment increasing with each passing second. Ethan remained where he stood, watching, his hands at his sides, his posture still, and the crowd parted slightly to allow the car through, their eyes following it as it moved toward the exit, smaller, quieter, but carrying a presence that no longer needed explanation. The sunlight dipped lower, casting long shadows across the track, stretching the shapes of cars and people into something softer, less defined, and as the sound of the engine faded into the distance, the silence that remained felt different now, not empty, but complete, as if the truth had already spoken in the only way that mattered, and nothing more needed to be said.